2 home games left and the regular season is over, leading to a critical playoffs against the Colorado Avalanche. The week ahead on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, obviously, we have some fun topics to talk about. It is playoffs week officially, and with the playoffs really rolling up here in just a couple of days, the Jets still have a couple of home games left, and I think there are a couple of lingering questions about what we might see from this team. Now, obviously, there's not too much left to sort out. At this point, the season is pretty much decided. We know what the Jets are going to be doing in a couple of days. The official playoff schedule hasn't been released yet. That probably won't be finalized until later this week, so keep an eye out for that. But in the meantime, the Jets have to take on the Vancouver Canucks and Seattle Kraken. And at this point, you sort of get a good sense that the Jets are going to take at least one of these games pretty seriously. The second game, they may rest some guys. We'll see how that goes. Before we dive into what to expect in the Kraken game, just wanted to let you know that tonight's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. Now, like I said, the Jets have a pretty good opportunity here in their final couple of games for the season to not only fully clinch home ice advantage, but also kind of ride in on a good high. I think right now everyone's pretty amped up. 2 huge wins against the Central Division, plus a couple of other ones. Obviously the Wild and Preds games were not small victories, although if you think about how the Jets won, I think it was most impressive to see them dismantle both Dallas and Colorado in consecutive games. That is the kind of performance that you really want to have in order to feel confident about facing Colorado in round 1. Now, the Kraken are a different animal and also a not particularly good one. Their season has been marked by a lot of okay stretches with a lot of very bad stretches. And those bad stretches, when they concede loads of goals, it's been a bit tough to try and get around that. This team definitely has good forward depth, but if you look at the top-end talent, there's not quite as much elite scoring ability as a team like this would typically need. Looking at this squad, though, you've got Burakovsky, Beniers, and Eberle as your first line, which is a pretty solid first line. It's not like elite or top tier, but you've got some really quality players. Beniers has really made his name at this level and is starting to really find his feet as a top-end player. Eberle has been around the game long enough to be a quality top sixer, and Burakovsky's kind of like a good middle six / top six scorer. Always was a big fan of him when he was a Cap, and he's continued to be a pretty effective player. Then you've got McCann, Yamamoto, and Schwartz on their second line, which is a nice trio. I think this is a great follow-up to the first line, and you can kind of see that they tend to spread some of their talent out a little bit. Then you've got Tovanen, Gord, and Bjorkstrand on the third, which has to be one of the best third lines out there. Tovanen, great scorer. Gord, an excellent two-way forechecking forward with a nasty little shot. And Bjorkstrand, who's just an all-around attacking presence with smart playmaking, and maybe hasn't always had the high-end finishing that a lot of people thought would kind of complete him, but still a really good player. Fourth line, you've got Tanev, Belmar, and Cartier, which is a pretty nice trio. I think this fourth line is going to be a bit of a pest for the Jets. Winnipeg is going to match probably the Nemesnikov line against it, which I think the Jets should probably win. I think the main takeaway I have from this game is that, Winnipeg definitely has the advantage on paper. And I think given how the Kraken have played recently, which has been sort of up and down the last few games, Winnipeg should honestly come away with a couple of points here. And probably 1 point at least will be more than enough to get the job done. I think at this point, the Jets just want to kind of have home ice really locked down. And against a mediocre team that's gone 5-5 recently and is actually just around 500 this season. This could be a really nice coming home sort of gift and a great way to clinch home ice right in front of the fans. I really feel like that's going to be the big thing this week. After that, they do have a game against the Canucks, and Vancouver's probably just going to be resting some guys. I don't know if they have that much to play for. I think at this point, the Central or the Pacific Division is mostly locked up. The Oilers still have a couple of games. They've got one game in hand, which Vancouver probably won't love, but assuming the Oilers drop one of their next games, it should leave the Canucks enough room to squeeze out at least a point somewhere and basically lock it up. So overall, I suspect by game 82, not going to be much to play for. We'll see, though. Assuming the Jets kind of put out maybe a rotational lineup, I'd like to see a couple of guys come in. Maybe they do the Brad Lambert thing. I don't know if Lambert's going to be a figure here. He's going to definitely be a big part of the Manitoba Moose playoffs, and maybe they just leave him with the Moose. I could see them not really bothering with a call-up and just leave him down there for now to really prep for the postseason there, because the Moose have clinched their playoff spot as well. It's going to be a fun ride, and with some reinforcements who have recently joined the team, they could be poised for maybe a round or two. I don't know if this team is like elite necessarily. I think they're a fun playoff team, but you've seen the Moose kind of go a little bit all over the place the past couple of months. They really rode a huge hot streak in the final weeks to clinch their playoff spot, but it was a bit of a rough ride getting there. So wouldn't be shocked if Lambert, Chibrikov, and guys like that just stick around. We might, though, see one big player join the org, and that is Rutger McGroarty. It sounds like Frank Nazar has already signed his deal with the Hawks, which, if you're a Jets fan, is actually pretty good news for Winnipeg, because it means that Michigan is starting to bleed some talent. And if, these guys are departing and McGroarty is one of the last guys, he may not decide to stick around. It might be time for him to turn pro. And I think if you're the Jets, that would be the best option for all parties involved. Honestly, for Rutger, it would probably be pretty good too. The sooner he gets acclimated to the pro levels, I think that could be, a really big point of, for maybe this season, maybe next. I suspect that McGroarty might be a bigger boost for the Moose than the Jets. Not to say that he won't play for the Jets this year, but I do feel like if you're looking for a guy who probably needs to get some pro ice time, maybe look at Manitoba and see if he can boost their middle six or something. I don't think he should be thrown like top 6 minutes immediately. Let him get acclimated to the pros. He might not even draw into the lineup that much because, again, he's a college kid coming fresh out of college, hasn't really played against pros all that often. And so maybe, they try and ease him in. We'll see. I know Barlow has had his debut, which is very fun, lovely to see. And honestly, next year's Moose team is looking to be absolutely crazy. So, if you're talking about a top-end AHL squad, the Jets will have one next season. But, of course, amidst all of that, they're going to have a lot of prospects who are going to be looking for full-time NHL rides. And we'll talk about which of our young stars in the making might be the most likely to make the jump. There's a couple of them that I think really could fight for spots. And I think it's going to make the free agency period a really difficult challenge, right? Because the Jets are kind of in a transitional phase after this year where, there's some contracts that are going to expire this summer. There's some that are going to expire the following year. And you have a lot of interesting talents who are perhaps ready for a longer NHL look. We'll talk about which of our prospects might be ready to make that prized jump to the Jets in just a little bit. Before we go any further, though, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your vehicle alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has your back. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back. With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge victories. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are checking in not only on the week ahead for the Jets, but also talking about some prospects, obviously Winnipeg has had a very good year in terms of prospect development. There's been a lot of names that have joined the org. There have been a lot of guys who are perhaps starting to get some tryouts. We might see some big names perhaps signed this week with the org. Kind of waiting on that to see how that goes. But for Winnipeg, right, this is a very exciting week. The playoffs start for both the Jets and the Moose. Everyone's kind of all on board. Things are feeling good. This is, well, if you're a Jets fan, a great time to be alive. That's all I can say. But as far as like players making the jump, right? Obviously, there's a couple of names that I think are really close, and maybe some guys who are a little more longer term. Before we dive into, say, the near term players, just wanted to let you know something really cool for a lot of you NFL fans. Locked On NFL's mock draft is live on April 17th at 7 p.m. Eastern, streaming on the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Find the Ultimate 6-episode series on April 17th at 7 p.m. Eastern to hear who Locked On experts are picking for every NFL franchise, with live reactions from local college experts and even our fantasy football angle. The NFL Locked On mock draft on April 17th at 7 p.m. Eastern, streaming live on Locked On Sports Today 24/7 or on YouTube and the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. So be sure to like, follow, and subscribe, and check out their mock draft preview. Now, like I said, for the Jets prospects, obviously Winnipeg has a lot of guys who are kind of waiting in the wings, I would say. And we have a couple of star players who have really cemented their role in this organization as, I would say, ones to watch, right? And I'm talking about guys like Brad Lambert, Rucker McGroarty, Colby Barlow, and even Elias Salamanson, I think, is another player who perhaps is coming over to North America in a few weeks. He's a big player that I'm really excited about and who maybe doesn't get a lot of attention so much because he might not be the most exciting or sexy name, but I think he's a really good player and perhaps could be a really good replacement one day for Dylan DeMello, right? Because I think, DeMello is starting to age out a little bit, and with him kind of getting older and maybe declining a bit, it might be time for him to start thinking about, how many seasons he really has left at this level. But for the Jets, we have some other names that I'm really interested in. For the near-term guys, I think, Brad Lambert is going to be a Jet next year. I feel like I'm pretty certain of that. And I think he could even be in a center role, which will add a lot of intriguing battles in camp, because assuming that Lambert does play down the middle, right, we're seeing Sean Monahan do really well right now, and I sort of wonder what the Jets are thinking about with Lambert, because asking him to be the second-line center next year, not really realistic, right? What I would imagine and what could work is if you have, Scheifele, then Lowry, and then Lambert on your third line. With how the Jets use the Lowry line anyways, that honestly wouldn't be that different from their current mode of deployment, right? Because typically the second line is more like a third line in the pecking order. But with Lambert, you might have to shelter him a little. He is still a little bit raw. He's still got some tendencies that are at, kind of a work in progress at the pro levels. But his overall explosiveness, the playmaking skill, the goal scoring ability, the vision, spatial awareness, all that stuff, really high end, really elite. And based on him having one of the best rookie seasons the Moose have seen in some time, it's very likely that he'll be a huge part of this team next year. And I think he's a guy that I'm circling for potential Calder discussions as we get closer to that. I don't know that he'll necessarily be in the final three, but in terms of a guy who might be in the top 10 for the trophy, if you even approach that, that's really friggin' good. His potential line mate of the future, Rucker McGroarty, might also be in that conversation. Rucker has really I would say skyrocketed in Winnipeg's prospect pool. And I know that he's playing at the NCAA level, which comparatively speaking, it's not quite the same as playing at the pros, but make no mistake, McGroarty is super talented. He's done really well as a two-way attacker at the Team USA level. And with his frame and skill and improved skating, I really feel like he is a player that could become a really, really good Andrew Ladd type down the road, right? Ladd was always very good in the corners and had an extra layer of skill that I always felt really went underappreciated and perhaps could be really worth spotlighting for the future. I think McGroarty is a guy who will be a stud for the Jets. I think he and Lambert are going to be two of our biggest names, and I think they could both play a role with the Jets next year. McGroarty might get more ice time just because I think his style and the way that he attacks might be something that if Bones is maybe the head coach or if Arniel is, they might really prefer that. But I'll kind of reserve judgment to see how they want to deploy him. I imagine both will have an easier introduction to start, and then we'll kind of see after that. Chibrikov, I feel like might be the following season or maybe even midseason next year. I feel like he's pro ready and NHL ready, but it does kind of seem like his game may need a little more seasoning before he joins the Jets. He's a really exciting player, and I think his first season with the Moose has been a huge, unqualified success. I think you should be very excited about him. He is one of our higher ceiling prospects and a guy that, since joining Manitoba has really taken flight. 45 points in 68 games this year. Very clearly one of Manitoba's top scorers. Again, maybe a slight step behind Lambert and some of those other guys, but still, considering where he was taken and what was expected of him, he has really blossomed. Looking a little further out, I'm kind of interested to see what Jakob Julien and Connor Levis do. Levis, I believe, just signed a tryout with the Moose. And Levis, when I saw him in camp, I always thought that he looked really interesting with his vision and passing, which is a skill that for the Jets has kind of been a little bit of a problem in the past, right? Our breakout passing and stuff, I wouldn't exactly say is elite, right? It's a problem once you start getting into the depth roles. And I'm not going to say that the Jets have bad passing necessarily, but there are certain kinds of passes that this team really can't make. And in terms of like stretch passes and stuff, Winnipeg has tried to really work on that, and they've gotten a lot better, but still a little up and down at times. Levis really looks like a player who's got great vision and spatial awareness. I always feel like when he's attacking anywhere around the faceoff circles and stuff, just from the bit I've watched of him, I like the way that he picks out his line mates and finds them for really good goal-scoring opportunities. He's got great passing, soft hands, and, despite people really harassing him, he seems to keep good balance. And while I don't know if his skills really project at an NHL level beyond the bottom six, hey, if you've got a bottom six maestro, you just really can't complain about that. Julien has also really grown with the Knights as like this big imposing force, big scorer. I kind of wonder long term if he kind of becomes a player who might be like a maybe like an Adam Lowry type one day. Lowry has been like a super monstrous two-way forward with not really high-end offensive chops, but in terms of driving transition, driving great defensive results, and also chipping in chaos down low and at the other end of the ice, he might be the kind of player that, becomes that Lowry sort of replacement, because Adam's getting up there in years. He's the team captain now, but at some point you might think, maybe he, starts to age out. And with Julien being very young and with a huge body frame and imposing size, great skill, and a persistent motor that has really led to a continued growth in this game, in a couple of seasons might be interesting to look at and see where he is. Obviously, he is still very young. We're talking about a kid who just, is probably not ready for the pros yet, but maybe after this night season, we'll see. Maybe he gets a tryout. He's an interesting player. I know I was kind of down on the pick when they were taking him because he was one of those, he's, 6 foot kind of draft picks, right? 6 foot plus, but he seems to be pretty mobile. He seems to have really imposed as well at the OHL level. So, hey, maybe there's more to it. Like I said, though, I think, on the defensive side of things, the guy that I'm mostly waiting for at this point is Salamonson. Salmon Man's a big kid. I think he's a super smooth puck handler and very good skater. I think for the Jets, they're very clearly expecting him to be a top 4 defender at some point. Probably not next year, but maybe in the years following, he starts to get some really good ice time. I hope they integrate him a little faster than they did Sandberg. Sandberg has really been a big success story, but it would have been nice to have him a little bit sooner, partly from injury, which you can't control, but also I feel like they maybe waited just a little bit too long at times. So something to keep in mind. But hey, Heinele looks like he's poised to take the next step with the Jets the next season, not this year, but next season. And, with Salamonson coming in, Winnipeg is getting some really interesting puck moving ability at the pro level. So a lot to be excited about. I'm kind of intrigued by all of what we're seeing with Winnipeg. There's a bright future with this team, and the present is already looking good. So, hey, if the future can only get better from here, let's get excited right now. Of course, though, speaking of players who are bright prospects and talents, I wanted to talk a little bit about one thing that I've been less happy with. And of course, it's the Perfetti benching, which I don't agree with. I know the Jets have done really well recently, but I feel like Perfetti, who is like a 20-goal scorer this season, benching him when you are perhaps struggling to score at even strength in the past few months feels like a bit of a mistake. We'll talk about what role he would make the most sense for with this team in just a little bit. Before we go any further, though, I do want to shout out our friends and partners at Sleeper. We are almost at the end of the year, and the Jets have kind of gone from strength to strength, at times dropping some big games, but, recently they've really rounded the corner and seemingly are on path to a home ice advantage in round one of the playoffs, which is definitely nothing to sniff at. Regardless of where the Jets are in the standings, though, I want to remind you that you could win big by playing Daily Fantasy Hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you could win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. For those of you who think that you know the stats better than everyone else, this is your chance to flex your knowledge. If you're tracking stars like McDavid, Crosby, Ovechkin, Ehlers, Hellebuck, Vasilevsky, you name it, Sleeper tracks those too, and their experts make projections for games all the time. If you beat their projections, whether it's more or less for a given game, you could win big, especially if you get 8 of those projections correct for a given game. 8 correct projections for a given game means you could win 100 times your bet on Sleeper. That's 100 times your bet with 8 correct stats categories. So start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions do apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for joining us on tonight's episode as we are just wrapping up with some stuff about the Jets that's maybe a little bit less exciting, perhaps less happy for me. I think in particular, you know what I'm about to talk about. I just prefaced it a second ago, but it's the benching of Cole Perfetti the past few games that's really starting to irritate me. There's not much about this team this year that's really legitimately pissed me off, but the treatment of Perfetti has probably been up there. You've got a guy who's basically playing like 5 minutes a night, a bit of an exaggeration. It's more like 14 minutes a night, but like he is one of our best playmakers who's been a great scorer this year. He's actually upped his scoring compared to last season, although it did take him more games because he was also stable to the fourth line for like a third of the year. And with Perfetti, it's complicated for me, right? Because I know why Bones doesn't trust him, but in terms of a guy who's bringing, almost 20 goals this year, had one of the highest scoring rates for a player relative to his ice time on this team. Like there's really legitimately one of the highest even strength scoring rates on this team. The fact that he can't get into this lineup now is a little bit disconcerting. And not because I feel like there's tons of guys who haven't earned their spot on this team, but I think with Perfetti, right, you saw him with his recent top 6 promotion. Alongside Connor and Monahan, they were absolutely torching opponents. I mean, it wasn't even close. And then, the next game, he suddenly finds himself riding pine after the Preds disaster. And it's just like, what's the plan with him? Because, you're talking about benching one of your top creative talents, and a guy that, quite frankly, needs to be a long-term player for this team and could be a really big contributor now. You almost have to view him like an internal rental. I really feel like benching him doesn't really make sense when he's already outscored most of the guys in the bottom 6. And, if you're worried about his defense and physicality, not really a concern. I mean, he'll go to the corners. He's a surprisingly physical player who will get back up after a lot of bad checks. I've seen him get some nasty hits, and he just keeps chugging along, and he's not afraid to dish it back out. What I think has always really struck me about the way that he defends is how smart he is. I mean, there's so many parts of his game that are very intelligent, right? He's a great passer. He sees the ice better than almost anyone else on the team. He can make passes that no one else can. And his awareness of timing and stuff is really elite. The kid is a phenomenal talent. And I know people will say, well, he'll get his chance, and he will, but you have to worry about his relationship with the Jets, right? The more that he keeps getting benched and the more that he rides pine when he knows that he's better than some of the guys that, are currently in the lineup, it's not a great situation. People sometimes overlook the HR side of things and the relationships that are built. And I do worry a little bit with Perfetti long-term what his view of his role with this team is, because he was told he was going to be a big star for this team this year, or at least a guy who's a really big cornerstone of the offense, and he really hasn't been given that. And I'm probably exaggerating a little bit what he was promised, but also in terms of the whole role thing, that was a point of contention that came up earlier this year. He was like playing less than, third line minutes, and his agent and Perfetti himself were both not really thrilled with that. So, yeah, I don't quite understand the thinking. Like, even if you just look at it from a scoring perspective this year, he's got 36 points. You don't really bench many guys like that who are as talented and as creative as Perfetti is, and a guy who, quite honestly, would be an improvement for this team, especially as they head into a critical matchup against the Avs. The way that he plays, his defensive responsibility, his skill and creativity, I just don't understand why you'd really make him ride pine rolling into the playoffs. I expect him at some point to draw in this week, but I really feel like not using him in the playoffs would be a problem. And I know what people will say. He's young. He'll get his chance. He may get his chance, but like the Jets kind of need to win these series to win the cup. So if you kind of willingly bench one of your best creators in favor of a guy like, say, David Gustafsson, who I personally really like, but who's maybe not the most elite playmaker, makes you ask a couple of questions. I don't want to sound too dour and too negative, and I feel like, relatively speaking, this is a lesser concern over the grand picture, but it's enough of a problem to where I'm starting to be a little bit concerned about Perfetti and what he sees with this franchise, right? I don't want him to start feeling like he's being excluded, and if the Jets go on a deep run, right, I think it'd be really good for the Jets to fold him into that, because the longer he sits and the less he plays, the more pissed off and unhappy he's going to be. And with a contract extension kind of looming in a couple of months or a couple of years, obviously the Jets really need to make sure that they've got him prepped, right? This upcoming extension is going to be a real concern, and he may not have leverage right now, but we've seen players force their way out of Winnipeg before, and I just hope that he's not thinking about that at all, right? This is a kid that could be a huge star for us in the future. I am very excited about his potential, and I think the current player is already very good. It's just whether or not the coaching staff is finally going to recognize that. Probably not this year, hopefully next year. But let me know your thoughts on the Perfetti situation. Are you hoping that he draws in this week? Do you want to see him play? Let me know in the comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, that is going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We'll see you back here tomorrow with coverage of the Jets versus Seattle and hopefully a big Winnipeg home ice clinching victory. But like I said, all the time that we have for tonight, as always, have a great night and go Jets go.